I've always believed that family comes first. At least, that's what my parents drilled into me growing up. I'm Joanne, 50, working as a creative director at a mid sized advertising agency in Denver. I bought my condominium 13 years ago, stretching myself financially, but determined to have a place to call my own. The mortgage payments were steep, but I managed them even after my divorce 8 years ago. Last month, everything changed when I got promoted to creative director. The salary bump was substantial, like almost 40% more than what I was making before. When the HR director told me the number, I had to ask her to repeat it to make sure I hadn't misheard. My heart was racing as I realized what this meant for me. The first thing that popped into my mind wasn't a vacation or a shopping spree. It was my mortgage. With this kind of money, I could pay it off 5 years early. The thought of being debt free, of truly owning my place before I hit retirement age, was intoxicating. A sense of security I hadn't felt since before my divorce washed over me. I couldn't wait to share the news with my family. My elderly parents, Helen and Robert, have always been proud of me, or so I thought. My younger sister, Lisa, recently got her position downgraded at the retail store where she works as a manager. Her husband, Tom, 48, works in real estate but somehow always seems to be between big opportunities. I'd helped them with their wedding expenses last year. It wasn't a small amount either, $10,000, but I wanted Lisa to have her perfect day. Every month, I'd also been transferring $600 to my parents' account for their utilities. Dad retired early from teaching due to back problems, and mom's pension from the library doesn't bring in much. I never complained about it. That's what family is for, right? I invited everyone over to my parents' suburban house for dinner to share my good news. Mom made her famous pot roast, Dad opened a bottle of wine, and Lisa and Tom showed up dressed like they were heading to a fancy restaurant. I got promoted. I announced after we'd all settled at the table. Creative director. That's wonderful, honey, Mom said, serving me an extra large portion of mashed potatoes. How much more are they paying you? I told them the figure, feeling a flutter of pride in my chest, and their eyes widened. Well, that's fantastic, Dad said, raising his glass. To Joanne's success. Everyone clinked glasses, and for a moment, I felt on top of the world. The years of hard work, the late nights, the stress, it had all been worth it. So, I've been thinking about what to do with the extra money, I continued, excited to share my plan. I'm going to put almost all of it toward my mortgage. If I'm aggressive about it, I could be completely debt free in about 5 years instead of the 10 I have left. The silence that followed was weird. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. Lisa put down her fork with a clatter that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. Is that really the best use of your money? Mom finally asked, her voice carrying a note of disappointment that made my stomach tighten. What do you mean? I was confused, the bubble of my excitement beginning to deflate. Dad cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses the way he always did when he was about to deliver unwelcome news. Well, honey, you're already making your payments on time. There's no rush to pay it all off now. At your age, you need to think about other things too. Yeah, Lisa chimed in, twirling her wedding ring, the one I'd helped pay for. Actually, Tom and I have been struggling with our rent lately. His commission structure changed, and things are tight. It would really help if you could chip in a bit each month. I stared at my sister, not sure I'd heard her correctly. A cold feeling spread through my chest. You want me to help pay your rent? For that house in the luxury neighborhood you insisted on moving to? Just temporarily, Tom said smoothly, reaching for his wine glass. Until things pick up again. You know how the real estate market can be. And your father and I, Mom added, patting Dad's hand. We've been thinking about replacing our car. The repair bills keep adding up, and with a little help from you. Well, now that you're making so much more money, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The room suddenly felt too warm, too small. Wait, let me get this straight. I just told you I got a promotion, and your first thought is how my money can benefit you? Don't be selfish, Joanne, Lisa said sharply, her eyes narrowing. That's what family does. We help each other. You're 50 with no kids. What else are you saving for? I already help. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. My hands were shaking slightly, I send mom and dad $600 every month for utilities. I gave you and Tom $10,000 for your wedding last year. How is that being selfish? That wedding money was a gift, Lisa said dismissively, waving her hand as if brushing away my words. And the utility money is just basic support for our elderly parents. We're talking about new needs now. I took a deep breath, trying to slow my racing heart. Look, I appreciate that everyone has needs, but I have goals too. I've been dreaming about paying off my mortgage early, and now I finally have the chance to do it. At 50, I need to think about my future and retirement too. So your condo is more important than your family? Dad asked, his voice tinged with disappointment that cut through me like a knife. After all we've done for you? That's not what I'm saying, I replied, feeling my cheeks flush with a mix of anger and embarrassment. I'm saying I need to take care of my financial security too. Once my mortgage is paid off, I'll have even more flexibility to help out if needed. Mom sighed dramatically, exchanging a meaningful look with Dad. I guess we know where we stand then. I just never thought you'd put yourself before family, Joanne. Not after how we raised you. The rest of the dinner was excruciating. Conversation was minimal, with pointed silences and thinly veiled looks of disapproval directed my way. Even the pot roast, usually my favorite, tasted like cardboard in my mouth. As I drove home that night, I felt a mixture of guilt and resentment churning in my stomach. Was I being selfish? Was it wrong to want financial freedom before taking on more family obligations? The voices in my head argued back and forth, but deep down I knew I had to stick to my plan. This was my future at stake, my security in an increasingly uncertain world. At 50, I couldn't afford to be careless with my finances anymore. 3 months later, 3 months after that uncomfortable dinner, I was making serious progress on my mortgage. Each time I made an extra payment, I felt a small thrill of accomplishment. My financial advisor had confirmed what I already knew. At 50, accelerating my mortgage payments was a smart move for my retirement planning. My family situation, however, was another story entirely. The calls from my parents had become predictable. Joanne, the water heater is acting up. Or, your father needs new prescription glasses that Medicare won't fully cover. Helen's voice always carried that subtle guilt-inducing tone that made my stomach clench. Lisa was worse, texting me at least twice a week with various financial emergencies. After her demotion at the retail store, something about missing sales targets consistently, she and Tom were apparently struggling to make ends meet in their oversized house. I always sent the money. Part of me felt obligated, while another part hoped that my generosity would eventually be acknowledged. It never was. The thank yous became briefer, the requests more frequent, as if my assistance was now expected rather than appreciated. Each time my phone buzzed with a new message, I felt a knot form in my chest, knowing it was likely another request disguised as family connection. One Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. My birthday party this Saturday at Tom's mom's house, 6 p.m. Bring a nice gift. Address: 1542 Oakwood Lane. I figured this might be a chance to mend fences, especially since I hadn't met much of Tom's family. Our only meeting was at Lisa's wedding a year ago. His mother, Patricia, had a reputation for being particular, Lisa's diplomatic way of saying she was judgmental and controlling. I spent my lunch break that Friday shopping for Lisa's gift, a designer handbag she'd been eyeing for months. It cost nearly $500, which meant adjusting my monthly mortgage extra payment, but I wanted to make a good impression and show there were no hard feelings. Saturday arrived, and I pulled up to a large colonial-style house in an upscale neighborhood. Cars lined the street, suggesting a bigger gathering than I'd anticipated. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I clutched the gift bag and rang the doorbell. A stern-faced woman in her 70s opened the door, her perfectly coiffed silver hair and expensive outfit immediately intimidating. "You must be Joanne," she said, looking me up and down with barely concealed disapproval. "Lisa's sister." "Yes, that's me." "Nice to see you again, Patricia," I replied, forcing a smile despite the immediate tension I felt. She nodded curtly and led me into a living room crowded with people. I spotted my parents chatting with a couple I didn't recognize, Helen looking elegant but tired, Robert leaning heavily on his cane. Lisa was surrounded by friends, laughing loudly, while Tom stood nearby with his father Donald and others I assumed were relatives. I had barely taken 3 steps into the room when Patricia's voice rang out, loud enough for several nearby conversations to halt. "So, Joanne, I've been meaning to ask you something," she said. "Why do you refuse to help your sister financially when you clearly have the means to do so?" The room grew quiet. I felt my face flush hot with embarrassment and confusion. My heart hammered in my chest as all eyes turned toward me. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. "Lisa tells me you got a big promotion," Patricia continued, her voice carrying across the room like a prosecutor addressing a jury. "Yet she and Tom are struggling to pay rent on their beautiful home, and you won't help. I find that interesting for a woman your age with no family of your own." I glanced at Lisa, who was suddenly very interested in her phone. My parents stared at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with me. Several guests were whispering to each other, and I could feel judgment radiating from every corner of the room. "I do help Lisa," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anger and hurt bubbling up inside me. "I've sent her money multiple times over the past few months." Patricia scoffed, the sound cutting through the room. "Pocket change. You could easily cover their entire rent if you wanted to, but instead you're hoarding your money to pay off your own apartment ahead of schedule. Very selfish behavior, especially for someone at your stage of life." I felt like I'd been slapped. Looking around the room, I saw my 75-year-old mother staring at her hands, my father examining his shoes, neither coming to my defense. The betrayal stung worse than Patricia's words. As if sensing my thoughts, Lisa suddenly appeared at my side, grabbing my arm with fingers that dug in painfully. "Please don't go," she whispered urgently. "It'll just make things worse. People will ask questions." My parents hurried over as well. "Stay, Joanne," Mom hissed. "Don't make a scene. This is Lisa's special day." So I stayed, swallowing my hurt and anger until it formed a hard lump in my throat. My skin felt too tight, my clothes too constricting, as I stood there surrounded by people who saw me as nothing more than a walking checkbook. The dinner that followed was excruciating. I sat silently while Lisa opened gifts and received congratulations. When it was my turn, I handed her the expensive handbag, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Oh, how nice," Patricia commented loudly, examining the bag with a critical eye. "Though I know you earn enough to have bought her something truly special." Several guests nodded in agreement. My parents exchanged glances and nodded too, their silent betrayal cutting deeper than Patricia's words. Lisa sighed dramatically, hugging the bag to her chest. "Not everyone understands the importance of family helping family," she said, glancing meaningfully in my direction. "Some people are just more financially focused." I sat there stunned by their collective audacity. For the next hour, I picked at my food and spoke only when directly addressed. My chest felt tight, and I found myself counting the minute until I could escape. As soon as I could do so without drawing attention, I slipped out the front door without saying goodbye to anyone. On the drive home, tears of anger and hurt blurred my vision, and I had to pull over twice to compose myself. At 50 years old, I felt like a teenager again, misunderstood, judged, and utterly alone. Days passed with no apology from anyone, not Lisa, not my parents, certainly not Patricia. It was as if the entire humiliating experience had never happened, except that it had, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The memory would ambush me during meetings at work or while I was trying to sleep, making my stomach clench and my heart race all over again. The following Sunday, my parents invited me over for their usual family dinner. I nearly declined, but decided this was an opportunity to clear the air. "Lisa will be there too," Mom mentioned on the phone, her voice carefully neutral. I arrived to find Lisa and Tom already seated at the table. My father was carving a roast chicken while my mother brought in side dishes. The normalcy of the scene was jarring after what had transpired at the birthday party. After some awkward small talk about work and weather, I couldn't take it anymore. The tension was making it hard to breathe. "I think we need to talk about what happened at Lisa's birthday," I said, setting down my fork with a deliberate calm I didn't feel. The table went silent. "What do you mean?" Lisa asked, her expression a mask of innocence that made my blood boil. I mean, how Patricia publicly humiliated me, accused me of not helping you financially, and no one, not one of you, stood up for me. My voice trembled slightly, but I forced myself to continue. You all just stood there and let her attack me in front of everyone. Lisa gasped, her hand flying to her chest in feigned shock. Don't you dare insult my mother-in-law. Patricia was just telling the truth. You are selfish, Joanne. You always have been, even when we were kids. Tom nodded, his arm sliding around Lisa's shoulders protectively. My mother sees through your act. You only care about yourself and your stupid condo. What's the point of paying it off early anyway? So you can feel superior to the rest of us? I turned to my parents, hoping for support, but they looked uncomfortable rather than indignant on my behalf. The betrayal felt like a physical pain in my chest. Well, honey, Mom began hesitantly, her fingers nervously folding and refolding her napkin. You have been rather focused on your mortgage lately and less focused on your family obligations, especially considering your age, Dad finished, not meeting my eyes. You're not getting any younger, Joanne. What are you saving for if not to help your family? I stared at them, these people who had raised me, who I thought would always have my back. In that moment, I realized a painful truth. They saw me as a resource, not as a daughter or sister who deserved respect and support. The revelation left me feeling hollow. I think I need a break, I said, standing up. My legs felt unsteady, but my resolve was firm. From all of you. You can't be serious, Lisa scoffed, but there was uncertainty in her eyes. I am, I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. I'm 50 years old. I've spent decades putting everyone else's needs before my own. It's time I started thinking about my future. This is ridiculous, my father muttered, but he didn't try to stop me as I gathered my purse and coat. At the door, I paused. When you're ready to treat me like a person instead of an ATM, we can talk. Then I walked out, feeling both terrible and strangely liberated at the same time. The following months, the next few months passed in a blur of work and mortgage payments. I'd stuck to my plan, making extra payments whenever possible. With each month, the balance dropped significantly, and I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. My financial advisor had started talking about increased retirement contributions once the mortgage was paid off, conversations that brought me a sense of security I hadn't felt in years. My relationship with my family remained distant. I still sent my parents their monthly $600 for utilities. I couldn't bring myself to cut them off completely despite everything, and I'd help Lisa with smaller amounts when she asked, but our interactions were brief and businesslike. No more Sunday dinners, no more long phone calls with my mom discussing neighborhood gossip or TV shows we both watched. In their place, I found new routines. I joined a book club. I started taking weekend hiking trips with a group of women my age, many of whom were also navigating complicated family dynamics. The more distance I created, the clearer I could see the unhealthy patterns I'd been trapped in for years. At 50, I was finally learning to prioritize my own well-being. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, I received the email I'd been working toward for so long. Mortgage payment confirmation. Final payment process. I stared at my computer screen, barely believing it. With my latest payment, my mortgage was completely paid off. My condominium, all 1,100 square feet of it, was truly mine. No more debt, no more monthly payments, just freedom. A weight I'd been carrying for 13 years suddenly lifted, and I felt tears spring to my eyes. This place was my security, my future, my achievement. And I'd done it 5 years ahead of schedule. Despite everything, my first thought was to share it with my family. Maybe this could be a fresh start for us. Maybe now that I'd achieved this goal, they could understand why it had been so important to me. I called an upscale restaurant downtown and made a reservation for Saturday night. Hi, Mom, I said when she answered the phone, my heart racing slightly with hope and apprehension. I have some good news I'd like to celebrate. I paid off my mortgage. Oh, that's wonderful, honey, she said, sounding genuinely pleased for the first time in months. The warmth in her voice made my throat tighten with emotion. I'd like to take you and Dad to dinner on Saturday to celebrate at Jovan's downtown. And Mom, could you let Lisa and Tom know? They're invited too. I held my breath, waiting for her response. There was a pause, almost imperceptible. Sure, I'll tell them. That's very generous of you, Joanne. Saturday arrived, and I got to the restaurant early, feeling excited and a bit nervous. I dressed carefully in a new outfit that had been a splurge but felt like a fitting way to mark this milestone. The hostess led me to a large table in a quiet corner, perfect for our family celebration. I ordered a bottle of champagne, not the most expensive on the menu, but a good one, and waited, rehearsing in my mind the boundaries I wanted to establish going forward. New start, new rules. My parents arrived first, both dressed up for the occasion. We exchanged slightly awkward hugs, but their smiles seemed sincere. Dad looked frailer than I remembered, leaning heavily on his cane, and Mom's hands showed more prominent veins and age spots. A pang of guilt hit me. Had the distance of the past months been too hard on them? Congratulations, sweetheart, Mom said, squeezing my hand. We really are proud of you. Thanks, Mom, I replied, feeling a tentative hope bloom in my chest. Then, the restaurant door opened again, and I froze. It wasn't just Lisa and Tom walking in. It was an entire entourage. Behind them were Tom's parents, Patricia and Donald, followed by a woman who looked like Tom's sister, her husband, and three children ranging from about 5 to 10 years old. The hope I'd been nurturing withered instantly. My stomach dropped as I watched them approach, Lisa leading the way with a bright smile as if bringing 7 unexpected guests to my celebration dinner was perfectly normal. Hope you don't mind the extras, she said casually, air kissing my cheek. This is my family now, so I figured they should be here too. I sat there speechless as Tom's sister corralled the wait staff to rearrange tables to accommodate everyone. Patricia gave me a curt nod, but didn't bother with a greeting. The children immediately started complaining about being hungry, their voices carrying through the elegant restaurant. Since Joanne's paid off her mortgage, Lisa announced to the group, raising her voice to be heard over the children. She can afford to be more generous now. So everyone, order whatever you want, the most expensive dishes on the menu. The children cheered, and everyone started eagerly scanning the menu, pointing out truffle-infused dishes and premium steaks. I sat there stunned by their audacity, a familiar knot forming in my stomach. My parents were studying their menus too, not meeting my eyes. Were they in on this? Something inside me shifted. Maybe it was watching Patricia smugly order a $120 bottle of wine for her side of the table. Maybe it was seeing Tom's dad demand the restaurant's priciest seafood platter, or maybe it was just months of built-up resentment finally reaching its breaking point. I excused myself, saying I needed to use the restroom. My hands were shaking, but my mind was suddenly clear. Instead of heading to the bathroom, I found our server and pulled her aside. I'd like to modify my reservation, I said quietly but firmly. Could you please prepare separate bills for each party? I'll pay for myself and the table reservation fee, but everyone else will need to cover their own orders. The server looked a bit surprised but nodded. Of course, ma'am. When I returned to the table, everyone was chatting and ordering appetizers without a care in the world. I plastered on a smile and sat through toast after toast, each one thinly disguised criticism. To Joanne, Tom's father said, raising his glass, who can finally stop being so thrifty now that her mortgage is paid off? To my sister, Lisa added, her smile not reaching her eyes, who will hopefully realize that family deserves her generosity more than a bank. My parents chuckled at these jokes, nodding along as if they were harmless teasing rather than blatant attempts to guilt me into paying for more things. The longer I sat there, the more I realized how little had changed despite my months of trying to establish boundaries. I saw my family through new eyes that night. Dinner progressed with everyone ordering multiple courses and expensive drinks. The children spilled sodas that had to be replaced and demanded desserts they barely touched. I calculated that the bill must be approaching several $1,000s. Finally, as coffee was being served, the moment of truth arrived. The server appeared with a stack of separate checks, which she began distributing around the table. The chatter died immediately. There must be a mistake, my father said immediately, his voice sharp with alarm. This should all be on one bill. My daughter is treating us tonight. The server looked at me questioningly. All eyes at the table turned to me, expressions ranging from confusion to dawning horror. Actually, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. I asked for separate checks. I'm paying for my meal and the table reservation fee, but everyone else is responsible for their own orders. The shocked silence that followed was almost worth the months of frustration. Patricia's face flushed dark red, while Donald's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. My parents' expressions of betrayal might have hurt once, but now I just felt tired of the games. This is outrageous. Patricia was the first to recover, her voice shrill. You invited us to dinner. Actually, I invited my parents, Lisa and Tom. I corrected her, maintaining my composure. Everyone else invited themselves, and it was Lisa who suggested ordering the most expensive items, not me. But, but this bill is over $500 just for me and Donald. Patricia sputtered, staring at the check in her hand as if it might bite her. Tom's sister looked panic-stricken as she stared at her family's bill, which included all the children's orders. This isn't fair. Lisa cried out, her face contorted with anger. You know we're struggling financially. This was supposed to be your celebration dinner, and yet you ordered the $75 steak and two $18 cocktails, I pointed out calmly. You assumed I'd pay for everything without even asking me. That's what's not fair. I took out my credit card and handed it to the server along with my individual check. I'm all set. Joanne, you can't do this. My mother hissed, her face red with embarrassment. What will people think? Actually, I can, and I am, I replied, gathering my purse. I stood up, turned to the server, and said loud enough for everyone to hear. Please make sure they all pay their bills. Don't let anyone leave without paying. I walked out of the restaurant to a chorus of angry protests and desperate pleas. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, and I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years despite the scene behind me. My phone started buzzing with texts before I even reached my car, but I ignored them all. Back home, I turned off my phone and slept better than I had in months. When I woke up the next morning and finally checked my messages, there were dozens of missed calls and angry texts demanding I return to the restaurant and pay the bills, apparently totaling about $3,000. The most recent message was from Lisa. We had to put it all on Dad's credit card. How could you do this to your own family? I put the phone down without replying. For the first time in decades, I spent a Sunday morning doing exactly what I wanted, enjoying coffee on my balcony, reading the paper, and planning a solo trip to Portugal with some of the money I was no longer putting toward mortgage payments. The confrontation. The pounding on my door started around noon the next day. Through the peephole, I could see my parents and Lisa standing in the hallway. They looked furious, Mom's lips pressed into a thin line, Dad's face flushed red beneath his gray hair, Lisa practically vibrating with anger. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home, but I knew this confrontation was inevitable. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and opened the door. They didn't wait for an invitation. All three pushed past me into my living room, the living room of my now fully paid for condominium. Their intrusion felt especially violating given my recent accomplishment. How could you? Lisa shrieked, whirling to face me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, either from crying or lack of sleep. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? Patricia hasn't stopped calling me, blaming me for bringing her to such a tacky event. My father pointed his finger at me, the tremor in his hand making the gesture less threatening than it might have been years ago. $3,000, Joanne. That's what you stuck us with last night. $3,000 we had to put on our credit card. His voice cracked with indignation. We'll be paying interest on that for months. My mother added, clutching her purse like a shield against her chest. At our age, on a fixed income. I crossed my arms and leaned against the wall, feeling strangely calm in the face of their fury. And whose fault is that? I invited 4 people to dinner. 11 showed up. They're my family. Lisa shouted, her face contorted with rage. Tom's parents wanted to celebrate with you. They were being supportive. No, they wanted a free meal, I corrected her, keeping my voice leveled despite the anger bubbling inside me. Just like they've wanted free money from me all along. Just like all of you have. That's not fair. My father protested, leaning heavily on his cane. For a moment, I almost wavered. He looked so old, so vulnerable. But then I remembered his silence as Patricia humiliated me at Lisa's birthday party. Isn't it? I raised an eyebrow. Mom, Dad, when was the last time you called me just to chat, to ask how I'm doing? It's always about money, always about what I can give you. That's what family does, my mother insisted, her voice trembling slightly. We help each other. You don't have children to support like Lisa does. You don't have medical bills like we do. Funny, it seems like I'm the only one doing the helping. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd prepared after last night's fiasco. I've kept track, you know. In the past year, I've given you two over $10,000, not counting the monthly utility payments. And Lisa, I've given you nearly $15,000, including your wedding contribution. They stared at me in silence, the figures apparently larger than even they had realized. And it's never enough, is it? I continued, my voice breaking slightly despite my efforts to remain composed. I pay for your utilities, and you want a new car. I help with Lisa's wedding, and suddenly I'm expected to pay her rent too. I invite you to celebrate my accomplishment, and you bring an entire extended family to cash in. You're twisting everything. Lisa cried, tears now streaming down her face. We're struggling. Tom's job isn't stable, and my pay got cut. Meanwhile, you're sitting pretty in your paid-off apartment while we might lose our house. An apartment I worked my ass off to pay for. I shot back, finally allowing some of my frustration to show. No one handed me anything. I earned every dollar, saved where I could, and made smart financial decisions, all while continuing to help you. I'm 50 years old, Lisa. I need to think about my own future too. And now you need to help again, my father said, his tone suggesting this was simply a fact, not a request. You need to reimburse us for last night and apologize to everyone, especially Patricia and Donald. I actually laughed at that, the sound harsh even to my own ears. Apologize to the woman who's done nothing but insult me? To the family who crashed my celebration and ordered the most expensive items on the menu deliberately? No, that's not happening. So you're just going to leave us drowning in debt? Lisa's voice rose to a shriek again, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You created that debt, not me, I replied calmly. And speaking of debts, I've made a decision. I took a deep breath, knowing what I was about to say would permanently alter our family dynamic. I won't be sending the monthly $600 for utilities anymore. And Lisa, no more financial bailouts for you either. The shock on their faces would have been comical if the situation weren't so sad. My mother's hand flew to her throat, and my father seemed to age another decade before my eyes. You can't do that. My mother gasped, genuine fear flickering across her face. We depend on that money. I can, and I am, I said, the certainty of my decision giving me strength. It's time for all of us to stand on our own feet. I walked to the door and held it open, signaling that this conversation was over. I think it's time for you to leave. We're not going anywhere until you agree to pay us back. Lisa planted herself firmly on my couch, her arms crossed defiantly across her chest. Either you leave willingly, or I call the police and report trespassers in my home, I said, pulling out my phone. Your choice. For a tense moment, I thought they might call my bluff. Then my father sighed heavily, motioning for Lisa to get up. Come on. She's made her choice. The disappointment in his voice didn't sting the way it once would have. As they filed past me, my mother paused, her eyes searching mine. We're your family, Joanne. You'll regret this. Maybe, I acknowledged. But I'm more afraid of regretting another 20 years of being used. After they left, I sat down and blocked their numbers on my phone. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and toasted to my new beginning, one without financial manipulation from the people who should have been my biggest supporters. The apartment felt quieter than usual, but for the first time in a long time, the silence felt peaceful rather than empty. New beginnings. The next 2 months were surprisingly peaceful. I occasionally heard through mutual friends that my parents and Lisa were spreading rumors about me, calling me selfish, greedy, a terrible daughter and sister. It stung at first, but I realized their opinions no longer held power over me. I redirected the money I used to give my family into investments and a travel fund. I took a solo trip to Portugal, something I'd always wanted to do, but had put off due to family obligations and mortgage payments. Walking along the cobblestone streets of Lisbon, feeling the warm Mediterranean breeze on my face, I experienced a lightness I hadn't felt in decades. This was what freedom felt like, making choices based on my own desires rather than others' expectations. Back home, I started dating again, joined a hiking club with other women in their 50s and 60s, and even began volunteering at a financial literacy program for young adults. Teaching others the importance of boundaries, both financial and emotional, helped reinforce the lessons I was still learning myself. One evening, as I was walking home from a volunteer session, I ran into my mother's friend, Nancy, at the grocery store. "Joanne, it's been ages," she said, giving me a hug that surprised me with its warmth. "I hear things are strained with your family right now." I nodded, bracing myself for a lecture about family loyalty. Nancy had been friends with my mother for over 30 years. Surely she'd take Helen's side. Instead, Nancy surprised me. "Your mother tells everyone you abandoned them, but I've known your parents for 30 years. She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "They've always expected others to solve their problems. Your father did the same thing to his brother back in the day." She squeezed my arm. "Good for you for setting boundaries." That brief encounter was the validation I hadn't realized I needed. Other people could see the dynamic for what it was, not a selfish daughter, but a family that had grown accustomed to exploiting my generosity. Nancy's words stayed with me, comforting me on nights when doubt crept in. A week later, I received a letter from Lisa. Not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter. For a moment, I considered throwing it away unopened, but curiosity won out. "Joanne," it began, the handwriting less confident than I remembered. "Tom and I are getting divorced. His mother convinced him I'm not good enough for their family." The irony isn't lost on me. The next part was crossed out multiple times, but I could make out the words, "You were right about them." The letter continued, "I've been thinking about how I treated you, how we all treated you. I won't ask for money, but I would like to talk someday. Lisa." I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. The vindication I might have expected to feel didn't come. Instead, I felt a complex mix of sadness for my sister and relief that she might finally be seeing the truth of her situation. Maybe someday we could rebuild our relationship, but it would have to be one based on mutual respect, not financial dependence. As for my parents, I heard they downsized to a smaller house, something they could actually afford on their income. Part of me felt guilty, but a larger part felt relieved. They were finally taking responsibility for their own finances. At their age, it was better late than never. On the 6-month anniversary of paying off my mortgage, I hosted a small dinner party in my condo, not for family, but for the new friends I'd made through my hiking club and volunteer work. As we laughed and shared stories, I realized I'd created something valuable, relationships based on genuine connection rather than obligation or exploitation. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city lights. At 50, I was finally free, not just from my mortgage, but from the weight of others' expectations. Whatever the future held, I knew I would face it on my own terms, with boundaries intact and self-respect renewed. My condo wasn't just paid off, it was truly mine, a symbol of independence earned through perseverance and the courage to finally say enough.